Okay. Good evening, everyone. Good evening to all our participants from India and Bangladesh. And good morning to all our presenters from Team South Carolina. My name is Tarun Gupta. I'm the Managing Director for South Carolina Department of Commerce, India office, with wider responsibilities for South Asia. We are really pleased to welcome you all for taking time to join this virtual investor meet on opportunities in South Carolina for textiles and advanced materials sector. This is first of a series of virtual investors meet across different sectors as we adapt to the new way of doing business. Current business climate is challenging, to say the least. Well, as one wise person said, every challenge presents an opportunity. The current pandemic will result in new business model, new business partnerships. And can South Carolina emerge as a preferred business partner for South Asia? What are the opportunities, the challenges? These are some of the questions which we will aim to answer over the next 60 minutes. But let's just step back a bit and ask ourselves three questions. Why textiles? Why USA? Why South Carolina? Well, why textiles? I think the most awaited thing in the world currently is the vaccine. And after that, I think it's employment. And textile sector is one of the most job intensive sector. Studies have indicated that for $1 million of investment, you create 75 times more jobs as you would do in the automobile sector, 250 times more jobs as you would do in iron and steel industry. India, South Asia has a history and a track record as a hub for textiles. South Carolina has a history of textiles and cotton growing. Why USA? United States continues to be one of the largest markets for purchase of textile. In fact, it's the second largest market for Indian exports, for Bangladesh exports. And why South Carolina? Well, that's the reason why we're all here. South Carolina makes a compelling business case. You talk about costs, land, labor, logistics, power, regulations, the ease of doing business, the incentives, the raw material supply. Essentially, we will aim to answer why South Carolina is just right for business. We at South Carolina office, India office, are always available at your disposal to make your journey into the United States worthwhile and profitable. Please do not hesitate to contact us. I'll be moderating today's session. You will see some instructions on the chat. Please feel free to put your questions on the Q&A chat box, and we'll be taking all questions in the end. Before I hand over to our first speaker, I would like to extend a special welcome and a big thanks on behalf of the state to Mr. Shanmugam, the chairman of Tirupur Exporters Association. And on that note, I invite our first speaker today, Ms. Amy Thompson, Director, International Strategy and Trade for South Carolina Department of Commerce and responsible for all international offices of the state worldwide. Over to you, Amy.
Thank you, Tarun. And good afternoon, everyone. Greetings from a sunny and hot South Carolina. Our weather is very much like yours today, so you can understand our life in the summertime here in the South. As Tarun mentioned, I am Director of International Strategy and Trade here in Columbia and South Carolina. My role here at Commerce is to work with all of our international offices to manage our outreach and services in country. You may be interested in knowing that our state has offices in Germany, China, Japan, Korea, and of course, India. And as Tarun mentioned, please consider his team of professionals your office for South Carolina and India. And I too would like to thank Mr. Raj Shanmugam for his support of this event, and we'll have the privilege of hearing from him today. You'll also be hearing from my colleague here in Columbia, South Carolina, Teresa Powers. She's going to talk about our state and the textile and advanced materials sector here. John Fleming with the Southern Carolina Alliance will tell you about his region of the state and some great opportunities for doing business there. Sam Moses of the Parker Poe Law Firm will discuss some legal and tax issues for you, as well as how to do business in South Carolina and the United States. And DePaul Eliatombi and Kyle Clampett of Alliance Consulting Engineers will discuss site buildings and design matters. Of course, we're all here to take your questions, so please do. We want this to be a very interactive session. On a personal note, I'd like to tell you that I started my career in the textile and apparel industry here in South Carolina in the early 1990s, when it was quite strong here. As Tarun mentioned, we have a very strong history starting from the 1700s, where we were a big exporter of indigo and textiles into Europe. But then we saw textiles move into Latin America and then later into your region of the world where it became quite strong. But what we're seeing now is a new renaissance take place in the sector in our state, mostly led by China. And this is much attributed to our abundance of natural resources, including cotton, which is still a very large commodity grown here in our state. With the global situation of a trade war with China and the disruption of COVID, we really believe this is a great opportunity for India to enter into the US market. Americans are very receptive to new opportunities for resources coming in from other countries. So in spite of what you're reading in the news about social unrest and COVID, I can assure you that the state of South Carolina remains quite stable and manufacturing is at a steady pace. Our panelists today, myself included, have all had the wonderful privilege of visiting India and working with Indian companies. And we're very keen on assisting you as you consider expanding into the United States via South Carolina. So I want to thank you for your time, taking your time out of a very busy day and spending time with us to learn more about our state. So now I would like to turn the program over to Teresa Powers.
Thank you, Amy, and good afternoon to everyone. I appreciate you being with us, and my job today is to kind of give you a high-level introduction to the state of South Carolina, and then some of our other speakers will dive in to a little bit more detail. Let's see. Tarun is not letting me show my screen.
No worries. We'll just pull up your presentation. No worries. We'll just pull up your presentation. Yeah.
Thank you.
We'll just pull up your presentation. Here we go. Okay. We are all
very good.
Yep.
Okay. Can we get it over to the slideshow?
Sure. Okay, please. And
Very
we'll
good.
keep changing the slides. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. All right, we can go ahead. South Carolina, to give you an idea of where we are located, South Carolina is located in the southeastern region of the United States. We're considered a small state, ranking 40th out of 50 states in terms of land area. However, we rank 23rd in terms of population, which is kind of right in the middle out of the 50 states, with over 5.1 million residents. South Carolina is located on the East Coast, about halfway between the cities of New York and Miami. This strategic position is within 1,000 miles of 66% of the US population. South Carolina has the infrastructure to take advantage of its location, including 5 US interstates crossing the state, 2 Class A rail lines, a major seaport, and 2 inland ports. The state is anchored by 3 metro areas which go diagonally across the state. You see the Greenville-Spartanburg area in the northwest corner of the state. Then there's Columbia, which is our capital in the center of the state. and then Charleston on the coast. There are also two MSAs that border the state, one being the Augusta-Aiken area.
That's
If you're familiar with the Masters, you will see that. That's the area where the Masters golf tournament is played. And then you also have the Charlotte area, which includes 3 counties of South Carolina. You will also find an international airport in Charlotte that we actually use a lot to get in and out and around the globe. So let's go on and talk a little bit about the business environment in South Carolina. We have been very successful as a state in attracting new companies and growing our existing industry base. In 2019 alone, South Carolina had 129 announcements committing $2.4 billion in new capital investment and the creation of over 9,400 new jobs over 5 years. What accounts for the success? In addition to its strategic location and transportation infrastructure, South Carolina offers a business-friendly environment where companies can compete. South Carolina is consistently ranked as a top state for doing business by the trade publication Area Development. We are typically ranked in the top 3 to 5 states in the categories shown here, including business incentives and workforce training programs that I will touch on later. We have shovel-ready industrial sites that can be purchased for as low as a price of $10,000 per acre, as well as a favorable regulatory environment and utility rates and overall cost of doing business. Industrial utility rates are 13% less than the national average. Construction costs are less than 11% of the national average, and the cost of living is less than 10% of the national average. We have competitive wage rates with the 3rd lowest average annual wage in the Southeast, and the state is home to nearly 200,000 production workers, reflecting our manufacturing heritage. It is also worth mentioning that South Carolina has the lowest private unionization rate in the entire country, currently at 1.3%. While South Carolina's interstate system allows us to move people and products easily within the state and across the country, it is the Port of Charleston that connects us to the world. It is one of the most productive ports in the country with the deepest water in the Southeast. When the harbor deepening project is completed in 2021, the port will have a 52-foot depth and be able to handle the largest container ships without any tidal restrictions. Now that we've talked about the port, let's take a little bit of a closer look at how South Carolina connects with the globe. This slide shows some of the international companies that is located in South Carolina, and you will recognize a lot of the logos shown here. Michelin, Volvo, and BMW all located their first U.S. production plants in South Carolina. 5 foreign-owned tire makers are located in South Carolina, including Bridgestone and Continental. Samsung recently opened a washing machine production facility in Newberry, South Carolina. And you can see here how many international companies we have and how they are distributed among the state. We have over 900 operations with foreign-owned parents, and they employ over 145,000 workers. Taking a closer look at India, investment from India has increased over the last few years. Since 2011, Indian companies have announced $148 million in capital investments in South Carolina and the creation of 1,700 new jobs. One of the more notable announcements is the Sundaram Clayton facility near Charleston. The company will manufacture a range of high-pressure die-cast and gravity die-cast parts. TVS Supply Chain Solutions also has a location nearby. South Carolina focuses on several industry sectors. These include aerospace, which is anchored by the Boeing Final Delivery Center in Charleston. You have automotive with BMW, Volvo, and Mercedes, the Sprinter vans, all having final production facilities in our state. Advanced materials and composites, and this is where the textile industry would fall into this larger group. Agribusiness, which includes agricultural, food processing, and wood and paper products, and then the life sciences. So let's take a little bit of a closer look at our advanced materials sector and textiles. We have about 800 firms in South Carolina that participate in this sector. They represent almost 22 billion of economic impact. And you will see there, carbon fibers has become one of our more notable sectors here, with Toray producing carbon fiber up in the Spartanburg area for the Boeing facility, as well as Cytex. And you'll see Milliken there, which is one of our heritage textile industries that is homegrown from South Carolina. Here you can see how they are spread across the state with a high concentration up in the northwest corner, which is the upstate area. We have over 450 textile and textile related companies with over 24,000 workers employed there. And we've announced since 2014 about $460 million. Let's take a little bit of a closer look at our incentive programs in South Carolina and what it means to you to do business here. First, let's talk about what the services that you can find with the South Carolina Department of Commerce. While Tarun and his group will interface with you over in India, once you have decided that you would like to take a closer look at South Carolina, he will work with us to transition your project to the staff here in Columbia. As part of this, you will be assigned a designated project manager. That's the role that I currently serve in for the state. At that point, we will work with you and guide you through the process as you try to investigate opportunities in South Carolina. Part of the services that we will provide is to facilitate your real estate search. South Carolina, the Department of Commerce has a website, Locate SC, that is an industrial database of all of our industrial properties and available buildings. You can go online and search this to find opportunities around the state to locate your facility. And we will also use this database to try and find places to locate your business. Once you decide you want to come and visit South Carolina and see some of these locations, we will help you host a visit, setting up an agenda and scheduling the tours to visit real estate as well as other opportunities and service providers. As part of this, we can provide introductions to local government representatives. We can connect you with utility companies, introductions to service providers, which could include accountants, attorneys, engineers, and contractors, as well as meeting with the workforce providers. Ready SC, which is one of our great incentive programs, is the state's workforce training program that can help you train your workforce so that when you open the doors of your facility, they are ready with your production workers. So getting down to specific incentives, one of the other things we do is help you negotiate your incentive package. Incentives in South Carolina are offered to both new and existing companies. They are performance-based and are going to depend on your capital investment, your job creation, wages, and your location. There are two types of incentives: statutory incentives, which are available to any company who meets the criteria, and then there are discretionary incentives that are considered on a case-by-case basis. The statutory incentives typically would come into play at a minimum of $50,000 of capital investment and the creation of 10 jobs, whereas the discretionary incentives require a higher base, which would include at least $2.5 million of capital investment and depending on the program, 10 to 30 jobs. These incentives can be used to offset your tax liability. In South Carolina, you will look at property taxes, sales taxes, and corporate income taxes. Although for manufacturers, it's rare that we see companies pay corporate income tax. But if that happens, we do have credits that can offset these, as well as sales tax exemptions. It's worth mentioning that things like your industrial electricity would not have sales tax applied to it, as well as your production machinery and inputs into your product. And with that, I will kind of wrap up our discussion about incentives and turn it back over to Rune for our next speaker.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Teresa, for this excellent presentation. And with that, if I may request our next speaker, Mr. Shanmugam, to give us an overview from the Indian textile perspective.
Good evening and good morning to one and all present here. And Tarun Gupta, Mr. Tarun Gupta, Mrs. Sammy Thompson, Mrs. Teresa, Mr. John, Mr. Sam, and Mr. Deepal, and Mr. Kayal. Once again, I welcome you all and thank you for giving this opportunity. And as I belong to Tirupur, which is the hub for the knitwear industry of the country, India. So here actually we do have a cluster, the cluster formation, and with the support of the cluster, we are doing a turnover of around 7 billion for the domestic as well as for the exports. Exports around 4 billion US dollars and domestic around 3 billion US dollars. Both of goods are manufactured in this hub. And definitely this industry is a very potential industry, because as long as mankind lives on earth, the demand grows for few products. That is after the food, then health industry, then comes the clothing industry. So in which we could able to see the prospects, a very bright future for this industrial segments all across the globe. And fortunately, as it has been narrated by Mr. Tarun, that this is an employment generator too, because for whichever country it belongs to, that you can generate more employment, because it is an employment intensive, labor intensive industry, because even in the automotive world right now, what we are living, because being a design driven industry, the design accomplishment could be done by the manual intervention only. So because the automation has its limitation to the periphery of the garment making process, the manual intervention is very much required to accomplish the design task. So in that way, this is an ever promising job generator. And thanks for giving the details about the South Carolina, the prospects, how it could be worked out for the investors' point of view. And we are yet to get more information, and all the doubts what we as an investors we do have, if it is being cleared by the next speakers, I think it's going to be a win-win situation for the investors as well as the providers. So I wish that this webinar should enlighten all across the participants equally, and let us see how we can go forward together. So once again, I thank you all for giving me this opportunity, and wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shanmugam. And Tirupur is a very well-known name across the globe. You will very often you will find people, if you check where the garment is made, it's likely to be made for Tirupur, and it needs no introduction. I'm sure during the course of the whole meet, we will answer some specific questions. We've already got some questions on the Q&A. And with that, I will request our next speaker, Mr. John Fleming, who's in fact been to Coimbatore about 2 years ago, and to share his perspective. And John, if you may also want to touch upon some of the questions with regards to the cost of land and the whole land acquisition process, that would be great, John. Over to you, John.
Good evening, everyone. As Tarun said, and Amy, I'm John Fleming, and Tarun is not letting me share my screen. So
No worries. We will pull it up. No worries. We'll pull it up.
again, I'm John Fleming. I'm a civil engineer by training. I'm the Director of Development for Southern Carolina Regional Development Alliance. So the state is with Tarun and with Amy and Teresa directly. And to Tarun, I'm not seeing your screen, so I'll probably have to do it from my end.
Okay, go ahead, John. I think all of us can see the screen now. Yep. John, your presentation is live, so you can go ahead, John.
Okay. So thank you all for having me. Good evening again. So Southern Carolina Alliance, again, is one of the regional alliances, and our main mission is to marketing, product development, and workforce development. We're trying to create an area within our 7 counties, which is Allendale, Barnwell, Bamberg, Beaufort, Colleton, Hampton, and Jasper. We're kind of the southeastern part of the state. We're kind of between Charleston and Savannah, as the state is between Miami and New York. And our mission is to do marketing, industrial recruitment for our 7 counties, product development, and create a workforce that's ready for you when you come here. One of the things about our region, we are a more rural region of South Carolina, but we do have great quality of life. We are outside of the larger metro areas, but we do have access to beaches. We have about 300 kilometers of shoreline within our region on the Atlantic Ocean. We have a lot of resorts and areas for recreation for employees, and if you have people visiting from India and want to have them in the area. And yet we're still close to other larger metro areas. Savannah, Georgia is 15 minutes away from part of our region. Charleston, South Carolina is only about an hour and a half away. And we have Augusta, Georgia, and Hilton Head, which both have PGA tournaments right in our region. So you're close to everything, but yet some of our areas are in a more rural location, which provides you lower land costs. Again, we have the beaches, golf, plenty of shoreline and boating activities around. And then from our region, Governor Haley, who was the UN ambassador to the United States, is from our region. She grew up in Bamberg, South Carolina, within our region. So she has an affinity to our area, as she does for the entire state of South Carolina. And she's helped diversify the economy throughout the state and in our area as well. On our slide, you can see just a large amount of foreign investment within our rural area. And some of those include very large capital investment. We have Swiss Chrono, who has over $500 million in 3 expansions. We have La Creuset, the French pot maker, who has expanded 3 times in our region. And part of it is workforce availability, even though we're rural, and land cost. We'll touch on those a little bit. And then as you go, our targeted cluster industries are pretty much the same as the state, but we have a few others, including more agribusiness and forestry type products. We do have a historic connection to textile. Our area have many Milliken plants within it, which are no longer operating, but that is starting to come back. If you go to the slide, we have kind of our industries broken down. You can see some names you'll probably recognize and some smaller names that you probably won't, but they are all important customers and job producing companies within our region. We like the small companies and work as hard to have the small companies in our region as does the state of South Carolina as the large companies. We want a diverse economy and a diverse manufacturing mix, as you can see from those slides. We are, like I said, in a strategic location. We're pretty much between Savannah and Charleston. So we love the Charleston port and it offers excellent deep water access. Also, the Savannah port, which is also a very competitive port, is within a few minutes of some of our industrial sites. Some of the sites we're going to look at, it's within 15 minutes. Again, Charleston would be our preferred port. Georgia is in another, Savannah is in Georgia, which is another state. However, it does offer you the opportunity to use both ports because they both call on different parts of the world. As you look out around the entire state of South Carolina, you can see, as Amy has already talked about, a lot of companies that are in the state and a lot in our area. We're also, from that aerospace cluster, we're right between Gulfstream, which is in Georgia, and Boeing in South Carolina. So suppliers looking to work in both can find a very good spot in the Southern Carolina region with access to both and both ports. As we talked about training and Ready SC, within our region, we have 3 higher education groups. The University of South Carolina has 3 campuses in our area, and Technical College of the Lowcountry and Denmark Tech both have campuses scattered throughout our 7-county region. That is where the Ready SC workforce training would occur. It could also occur on your site in your plant. Teresa talked about the goal of Ready SC is to get your production employees ready on the first day of job. It's a customized program built around what you want so that on day one, they're ready. You're not having to train them to that minimum skill level. We really see our industries using that program a lot. We're going to kind of focus on the I-95 corridor. So Jasper County profile is what we put up. As you can see, there's a large population base at 60 minutes, which is not an unusual drive. We do drive a lot in South Carolina. So 60 minutes, you've got well over 1 million people and 700,000 workforce. And you can see those rings. We have people that live in Charleston and Savannah and work within our region. They choose to live in the larger area, but work in the smaller area. We're going to look at a couple of sites now, product, and they're focused on that I-95 corridor for the most part. The first one we're going to look at is kind of the Sherwood Track area. And it shows Sherwood Track and Riverport. But also on the bottom of the slide, it shows the Jasper Ocean Terminal. What that is a future, and it is a good ways in the future, but a new port facility that's being planned to be built that will give access to the southeast through a port that does not have to cross under a bridge. So even as ships get bigger and bigger and the other ports may become limited by bridges, this one will be an ocean terminal with no bridge between it and the ocean. Which right up the street from that is the Sherwood site, which is a 1,400-acre industrial site. It does have utilities on site. Southern Carolina Alliance owns the site, so this is owned by essentially a government entity, which makes it easy to negotiate. You're not working with a private landowner, but this site has been vetted and looked at. It is for a large project. Again, it's 1,400 acres. It has a large amount of usable land. And on the next slide, you can see that there are 2 million square feet of manufacturing space laid out with about another 500,000 square feet of support facilities. That is a rail served site. I know it's hard to see on that slide, but there is rail service onto the site and right into the industry. We go to the next slide, is Riverport Commerce Park. And this is a private development. So this is owned by North Signal Capital, and they are developing speculative buildings that are primarily for lease, anywhere from 140,000 square feet, which they just completed, up to over 400 square feet. As you can see on the slide, they've got some construction dates to be finished in 2021 with those spaces. Next slide is a picture of the first building that is complete with some of its specifications. They are in the process of leasing that building now. They have 2 people already interested in it. So the next 2 buildings they're trying to move along. The next slide is a smaller park, Cypress Ridge Industrial Park. So this park primarily has 50 to 150,000 square foot buildings in it. It is again close to I-95 in Jasper County, about 5 minutes away from the interstate. This park has a speculative building, which was, you call a plug and play building, and we have a plug and play building in that park. It's the fourth plug and play building that was built in that park. The other three have all been taken. And it has just been completed in the end of 2019. And unfortunately with COVID, we've not been able to show it a whole lot. We had some people look at it in January, February, and now it's kind of been quiet, but it is ready for you to come look at as soon as you can and move into. Again, it is plug and play. It is in the industrial park, so all the utilities are already in place. This building is owned by the county, so it is a government entity whose purpose of building that building is to create jobs. They are not necessarily looking to make a profit off of the building. Their incentive is to create a place for you to come to create jobs for the community. That particular building is ready to move in. It is listed, the listing price is 2.5 million. Again, that's a little over 50,000 square feet, and it is expandable over 100,000 square feet. The next spot is the Point South Industrial Park. Again, this is on I-95, has frontage on I-95. It is a park that is pretty much equally located between the Charleston port and the Savannah port, and it's 4-lane access to both ports. This park also has a plug and play building on it. The next slide shows a picture. This one is listed at 2.8 million. And it is ready to move into as well. This one is complete. It has utilities to it, just as the other. All of the parks in the state of South Carolina typically have all utilities already in place. We're trying to create the opportunity for you to be successful right away and be able to move in, whether you pick a building or pick land. And speaking of land, in these parks, as Teresa said, the prices vary, but these parks have land as low as $10,000 per acre, and they go up to about $25,000 per acre, depending on exactly where you are within the park. The last slide is the South Carolina Advanced Technology Park. This park is more inland. This also has a plug and play building that is virtually complete. The plans are finished. The building has not been constructed yet. We are right now building a rail spur on the site that building will be built on. So that will be a rail-served plug and play building within, again, an industrial park. And this is a mature park. This has Swiss Chrono in it, which is, as I mentioned earlier, they have over $500 million in that facility. And that's the world's largest laminate flooring facility. Inside an industrial park, all utilities available, including dark fiber. Water sewer is on site in this park. This park land is at the $10,000 an acre. I will conclude with thanking you for the time, and I look forward to the opportunity to meet some of you when I can travel back to India. I much enjoy coming to see you and would love to see you on the South Carolina side.
Thank you, John, and thank you for giving us an indication on some of the prices of the spec building, which we call them in India as plug and play buildings. Also, it was very interesting to know the price of the land. And these are lands in the industrial parks ranging from $10,000 an acre to $25,000 an acre. Yeah. So thank you once again. And we look forward to having you in India. And I promise we won't bring you in summer. We'll try to get you towards end of the year. With that, if I may move to our next speaker, Mr. Sam Moses. We have a lot of questions always on the legal taxation part of doing business. So Sam, you have a lot of ground to cover in a very short span of time. So over to you, Sam. Let's see if your presentation you can pull up. Otherwise, we'll do a share screen once again.
Thank you, Tarun. And I'll try to pull off the impossible, which is to keep a lawyer on a timeline of 10 minutes to talk about everything related to the legal aspects of doing business in the United States. Tarun, I believe I also will need your assistance
Sure.
to put the presentation on the screen. And while you're doing that, just want to thank everybody. It's a pleasure to speak to all of you in India. Certainly, I hope this presentation is fruitful and educational for you. And I think everybody certainly is available to talk with you offline as well after the call. So please let Tarun know after the fact, and we will be certain to make time for your individualized questions after the Q&A. So my name is Sam Moses. I'm an attorney in the United States. I'm based in Columbia, South Carolina, with Teresa and DePaul and Amy. And I've been in the business for about 23 years. I spent almost 10 years with the South Carolina Department of Commerce, working alongside Amy and Teresa and their organization, and did a very similar position to Tarun in Europe, managing the European office for 4 years for the state of South Carolina. And then I've spent the last 13 years with Parker Poe Adams and Bernstein, which is an international law firm with a regional footprint on the East Coast of the United States. We have 8 offices, 230 attorneys. Our offices are in Washington, D.C., 4 offices in South Carolina, and 2 offices in North Carolina, and another office in Atlanta, Georgia. Our firm has a history of representing international clients who are doing business in the United States. They not only have operations or multiple operations in South Carolina, but also a presence in other parts of the United States. As you all know, the United States is a large country. Certainly India is larger by population, but certainly for the market in North America and worldwide, the United States is a critical economy, and we are very active in understanding all the in navigating all of the issues that you might have with respect to legal and tax here in the United States. Our international capabilities as a firm, involve advising on, maybe Tarun, go back just one slide. Our international capabilities involve advising a company from the very beginning. If you're just thinking about starting up, exporting product or selling services here in the United States, we can advise you on the best ways to structure that. Often, a lot of companies at the early stage, when they're just beginning to develop a market in the United States, need a lot of support in connecting with potential customers, distributors, manufacturers. Maybe you're thinking about joint ventures. In fact, I'm working on one joint venture right now between an Indian company and a US company. There are a lot of issues to consider, even at those early stages. And while you think it may cost a lot to get advice on those types of things, we often find that it's very important to have the right advice, both from a legal and tax perspective, early on, to avoid mistakes that sometimes later arise due to the fact that you didn't get the proper advice. It ends up costing more in the long run. And so certainly I'd be happy to talk to you about what those costs are and what steps need to be taken. We are full service, so we can help with trade, customs, immigration services, tax services, and of course, if you're thinking about greenfield investment here in the United States. Tarun? Next. So the role of a legal counsel is maybe most importantly, because I know we're short on time. In the United States, the lawyer plays a slightly different role. I noticed this when I lived in Europe as well. We often are sort of looked to, maybe in India is the case, as only someone you go to because you want to deal with a lawsuit or a dispute. Maybe you are at the very end of a business negotiation and you just want to put a simple contract together. I love clients who say, Sam, can you put a very simple contract together? Of course, that's always the first thing we attempt to do. But quite frankly, what happens, because the U.S. is so contract-centric, contracts in the U.S. are critical, because if there is a dispute in the future, what lawyers in the U.S. try to do, at least business attorneys, they want to prevent as much potential misunderstanding and confrontation that may arise in the business relationship. And so everything is performed and outlined up front in the contract. So don't be overwhelmed by the amount of advice you're getting, all of the contract provisions, and the certainly the emphasis that lawyers and business people in the United States put on contracts. You will be at a disadvantage as an Indian business doing business in the United States if you have weak contracts. That's the bottom line. It will cost you a lot more, even if you're doing bad business and you want to just shut down your operation 2, 3, 4, 5 years later. Trying to exit the market without sufficient contracts could cost you a lot. So I encourage you to make sure you're doing the right thing in that regard. Lawyers are business advisors too here in the US, mainly because we've seen a lot of different transactions, and there are not only the legal issues, but there's the custom and the practice. So lawyers often are working with multiple businesses in different industries. Our firm has very significant experience in the textile advanced materials area. We have a number of non-woven clients, manufacturers who, for the most part, are internationally owned, from Germany, Turkey, Brazil, all of whom have major operations here in the Southeast US. And finally, attorneys in the US, they're not, while I can't speak for all of my colleagues, sorry about that, for the most part, you will find, because lawyers are subject to a very, very stringent ethical code in the United States, even when you have the first conversation, before you're even engaged with an attorney, you still are treated as a client, and as such, you have attorney-client privilege, which means nothing you tell us, unless you kill someone, we cannot tell anybody else what you tell us about your business and what your strategy is. And that is supposed to create a very trusted relationship between your legal advisor and the client. Tarun? So coming to the US, I'll try to break this. I've broken this down into really 3 different buckets. You know, the first bucket, as I referenced before, exporting into the United States or importing product into the United States. The second is when you've matured your market a little bit. Maybe you're thinking about actually establishing a company, maybe a small sales office, at which point you start thinking about, well, do I form a legal entity or not? And finally, as your business grows significantly and you think you're ready because of sufficient sales or contracts or customer demand, you say, I need to have a warehouse, assembly, or manufacturing facility that involves a whole host of different legal and tax issues. So based on which phase of the process your company may be in, either early stage or late stage, there may be different legal issues that come up as a result of that. Tarun? With respect to exporting, we often see 4 different models. Some are direct sales to customers. And of course, depending on the type of product you have and the industry you're in, of course, with textiles, you may have products that are finished goods that are more to the consumer. Obviously, technology with the use of or formation of companies like Amazon, Walmart, just online retailers. We're finding that a lot of foreign companies are actually storing product in the United States to avoid long shipping times in warehouses. Maybe they're doing it as a consignment. Maybe they're leasing space, or they're using fulfillment services for companies like Amazon that offer that. And then secondly, we'll see where you actually either engage someone as an independent contractor or an employee as a sales representative. Quite frankly, given the size of the US market, if you're very serious about starting in the market, it's very, very common to start with a small sales office, put a sales representative there into that office. And that means you have to consider whether it's an agent or direct employee, because you have different legal issues associated with which type of sales representative you want to use. And finally, as is often the case, a product manufacturer will have a distributor, someone who's not only helping with the sales, but also storage and fulfillment, as well as after sales service and repair. And often you want to find a distributor, and there are a number of different considerations you need to take into account for a distributor. So for purposes of exporting, one big question that keeps arising is, can I send people over from India? Well, certainly we'll talk about that a little bit later. But yes, if you are coming over as a business person, while you still need a B visa to come over and travel and talk to customers and introduce your products or services, that is something that certainly is permitted. Of course, right now with COVID-19, there's a number of different limitations we all have in travel. But typically with export, there's not too much you have to worry about in terms of the visas, but you do need to get usually a B1 visa. Next. With direct sales to customers, I think the most important thing is if you're selling here to the United States, you really need to think about product liability. That's a big, big issue. That can be dealt with in a number of ways, but the reality is you have product liability and you have contract liability in the United States. Product liability usually will always run back to the manufacturer. If you have a design defect, if you have a packaging or labeling defect, or if you have a defect in your manufacturing process. Because you have a product being sold in the United States in the US stream of commerce, you have subjected yourself to potential product liability. And so ways to deal with that may be insurance, which can be quite costly, but also putting the appropriate warranties, limitation of liabilities in your terms and conditions of sale. So even if you don't have a presence here in the United States, but you're selling and shipping product from India, you need to make sure you have terms and conditions of sale. Certainly that could be an Indian formed terms and conditions of sale, but we would also, in the best case scenario, encourage you to have one that's specific to the United States market, even if you're exporting product from India that's made in India, because all of those protections can be put into the terms and conditions of sale. So please, next one, Tarun. So we talked a little bit earlier about the sales representative or independent contractor. There are a lot of, let's say, a manufacturing representative in the United States that might be selling for you, let's say, textile equipment or certain parts and components for textile equipment. A lot of people opt for that because companies from outside the United States can have a contractor. They don't have to be responsible for all the appropriate withholdings like workers' compensation, unemployment insurance. The independent contractor in his or her own right is a separate business, and you will establish a contract with them, but they're responsible for filing their own taxes, for reporting their, handling all of their regulatory issues and conforming with the law. They will simply go out, solicit sales, and then put the orders into you. That is a very common model. But also, if you want to go the route of hiring a sales representative, the best thing to do would not be to hire that representative directly by the Indian company. You should form a U.S. company and then have the employment relationship set up with the U.S. subsidiary and that particular individual. Next. Distributor. So as we talked about before, distributor is a very common model to bring product into the market. Some of the key considerations there is you may start with a distributor here in the United States, but this is where contracts come in and are very, very important, because if that distributor is doing a good job, you want to make sure that you still have the ability at some point in the future when you decide to come into the United States as an individual standalone company, that maybe you don't want to have that distributor anymore. Maybe you want to bring the distributorship under your US subsidiary and then deal with the customers directly. So in order to do that, you need to make sure that you've got the appropriate exit provisions in your distribution agreement to make that process very easy, and vice versa. If the distributor is not doing a very good job, not meeting milestones in the contract, you want the ability to very easily terminate that. And you want to make sure that the distributor has certain non-compete and non-solicitation provisions in the contract whereby they don't have ownership over your customers and your customer list. Tarun? We'll skip this because I don't want to take up too much time. So in the US, major tax considerations when you're selling product to the United States, even if you're shipping it directly from India, please be aware you may have US tax obligations. While we do have a US-India tax treaty, that provides some protection, but please note that a lot of companies from overseas often don't realize they're supposed to be filing tax returns. And what happens is you're selling product in the United States for a couple of years and exporting it. And then when you go to set up a company, a US subsidiary, because your business is growing, then you're going to talk to an accountant or a lawyer and they're going to tell you, well, you know, you should have been paying taxes the last couple of years to the US government and maybe even to certain state governments. Remember, we have 50 countries. So if you're selling in 2 states, let's say South Carolina, maybe Texas or California, depending on the amount of sales that you are doing in those individual states or in the US, you may end up having what we call nexus, or a certain type of connection that is a connection through trade or business with that state. We've even had a case recently in the sales tax concept in which the court said if you have 100,000 or more of sales in the state, which is very easy to reach for many, many companies, then you have nexus and therefore you have to file tax returns and pay taxes. Could be income tax, could be sales tax, but all that should be considered. And of course, when you have a sales representative or you have, let's say, product in a warehouse in the United States, or you have people traveling regularly to the United States, you need to certainly think about whether you've created enough tax nexus such that you're going to have to pay taxes. Tarun? Just very quick, in the United States, the most common entities that will be used if you're ready to go forward with a subsidiary, your sales are doing well, you want to think about hiring independent contractors or sales reps, it's a good time to start thinking about setting up a company. And the most commonly used are the corporations for foreign entities, but we often also see limited liability companies and limited partnerships, all of which provide the most important thing, which is they allow the owners of the US subsidiary to have liability protection up to the amount of capital that they've invested in that company. And please note, there's no minimum level of capital for any of these companies, but it is important to properly capitalize the companies both through equity and sometimes debt may be advantageous as well through an intercompany loan. Tarun? Let's move past this one. I will say just one thing, that the U.S. Reduced the U.S. federal corporate income tax rate to 21% a couple of years ago. That was a major win for businesses, and that certainly has put a lot, certainly if you are an Indian company investing in the US and your intention is to reinvest your profits into the US company and not repatriate it out back to the home country, back to India, then you are going to subject yourself just to U.S. taxes. But if you don't have a legal entity and you're a branch, or two, you're a corporation, but you're going to distribute dividends out to India, just be aware that there is a 15% withholding tax for dividends, and there's a 30% withholding tax for branch operations where you don't have a subsidiary. So you may want to simply form a subsidiary alone for that particular case, so you can keep your taxes a little bit lower. Tarun, I know we're probably just need a couple more minutes. So obviously the last model that I talked about, you get into a lot more legal considerations when you start building warehouses or buying warehouses, or even contract manufacturing or entering into a joint venture. You're going to have to buy or lease real estate. Lawyers can help you with the decision about what's best in terms of purchasing or leasing. Construction contracts are critical. Ask Paul Eliatambi, who's going to speak after me. Those are very, very important and are commonly expected. Also, one thing about construction we often see in the United States that I encourage all of you to do if you're going to build a facility or buy a plant and then remodel it or renovate it. What I would encourage you to do is, it is better not to be your own owner representative. Don't be your own general contractor. You need to hire an outside company with the expertise and the proper licensing to do your design, engineering, and construction. There are so many construction lawsuits that have occurred and cost the companies millions of dollars in liability. Although it seems a little more expensive on the beginning to have the right expertise, the reality is 99.9% of the time, I don't know if you could validate that fact, but 99.9% of the time, you're going to have a major dispute in the area of construction. So have good contracts. And we also don't want to use, often my European clients want to use European-based construction contracts. Do not do that. We have something in the US called AIA contracts. That is what everybody accepts. And then there's negotiation on terms and conditions in those specific contracts. Again, corporate structure, do I own an operating business and a real estate business and separate legal entities might be a common question. Financing, perhaps your company is often international companies, when they come in the US, they don't have sufficient credit history to go out and borrow money. But there are some ways that you may be able to improve that situation. But you definitely want to start very early by setting up bank accounts and making sure you're building up a credit history here in the US. And finally, you're going to have legal issues relating to incentives, to immigration, and to employment. Most importantly, right now on the immigration front, two things. Unfortunately, Indian citizens do not have access to the e-visa categories. That's a major, major issue. A lot of our European partners and partners in Asia who we're doing a lot of business with have e-visa opportunities. Perhaps in the future, I know there's trade negotiations going on between the US and India. Maybe the e-visa will be a part of that. Certainly, I know the H-1B visa, there's a cap, and a lot of Indian nationals are having a hard time getting into the US due to the fact that you've got a specific cap. But I think if you're setting up a new business here, you're probably more likely than not going to have an L visa for executives, managers, and specialized knowledge. It's not going to be easy to get what I would call your typical production worker into the United States. You may be able to get certain employees in under B visas for short periods of time in order to train workers who are coming into the United States. Let's skip this.
Yes, and I'm going to request you to rush it. We just well past our time. So you want to pick up any slides or just very quickly? Yeah, go ahead.
Just want to thank everybody for the opportunity. And of course, we can go into more detail offline at a future phone call if you would like to talk about legal and tax issues. Thank you, Tarun.
Excellent, Sam. Thank you. And we'll take up some of the questions in the Q&A, some very specific questions which you have already received. Thank you. And with that, I may request our final speaker for this evening. If I may request Deepal and Kyle to give us an overview on the whole regulatory from a construction, really how does it, what it entails to set up a facility or a plant or a unit. Over to you, Kyle and Deepal.
Thank you, Tarun. Good evening to all of our Indian friends. I had the pleasure of visiting India, New Delhi, Bangalore, and Chennai with Tarun and Governor Nikki Haley back in 2014. And that was our first trip, and looking forward to the opportunity when we can travel again. While Tarun gets our slides up, I want to say one of the things about going last is we're short on time. And some of the things have also been stated before, which is a good thing because we believe that things that have been said, worthwhile being said once, are worthwhile being heard twice. So, Tarun, as soon as you get the slides up, we're going to let you know that South Carolina is a great state. I came here 36 years ago to go to college, and I'm still here because I love it here. And if you visit here, you're going to love it here, and you're going to want to open your business here as well. So, Tarun, do you have the first slide?
Sure, just bear with me. Yeah, can you see the first slide?
Coming up, I think.
Yep, good. Yep.
Next slide. Yes, sir. So,
Okay.
Alliance Consulting Engineers is a civil and environmental site engineering firm. We're headquartered here in Columbia in the same building as Teresa Powers, Amy Thompson, Sam Moses, and several other folks. It's the middle of the state on that map. You see the star in the middle of the state. And we have 4 other offices around the state. They're about 150 to 200 kilometers away. And one in the Southern Carolina region that John Fleming mentioned. About 150 to 200 kilometers is about an hour and a half to 2 hours, depending on traffic. So very easy to get to. And during the course of the last 16 years, we have worked on about 1,800 plus projects, including some notable projects that Teresa and Amy mentioned, like Amazon, BMW, Continental Tire, GT Tire, Husqvarna, Samsung, Sundaram Clayton that Kyle's going to talk about, Toray, QVC. Those are all projects that Teresa and John and Amy put up on the screen, and those are some of the 1,800 projects from multiple different companies, from Indian, Japanese, Chinese, Scandinavian, Singapore, etc. So tell you how we are used to working with different cultures, and many cultures are very welcome in South Carolina. Some of the things that we do are due diligence services. That is the things you need to know about a site to be plug and play ready. It reduces the risk level for companies. Site design, including Vastu, that Kyle's going to talk about some case studies. Stormwater design and permitting. Roadway design and permitting that helps the site to be plug and play ready. Water and wastewater design and permitting. And in some cases, rail design. Not all projects require rail, but we design rail as well. Next slide, please. So South Carolina, as has been mentioned, is 4 different regions. Much like in India, there are different regions, and there are 4 primary regions, and the Low Country and the PD are along the coast, the Atlantic coast, about an hour and a half to 2 hours from where we're sitting right now. And we have offices in Charleston and Bluffton in those regions. And the topography is very flat there, so very easy to do Vastu. Midlands, where we're located at, is in the middle of the state. Topography begins to increase. And then the upstate region, historically textile region as well, but is a higher elevations and clay soils. So topography challenges make Vastu a little bit more challenging. Next slide, please. So South Carolina has 46 counties. There are county councils in each of those 46 counties. A population, as Teresa mentioned, 5.1 million. That's middle of the road, number 23 in the country. And with that, I'm going to ask Kyle to talk about the permitting requirements.
Thank you, DePaul. Next up is the permitting requirements. Permits are required before you can start construction. So we wanted to identify a few things that you need to have in place before you can start work, because the goal is the faster we can start construction, the faster we can get you to making money, which is your ultimate goal for coming to the United States. The first item is land disturbance permitting. That's also known as allowing you to grade, do earthwork, site work. So before you can disturb the soil, you need a land disturbance permit. That is regulated at the state level, and it takes between 30 to 45 days. That permit in place allows you to start earthwork. While that's going on, you can also work on things such as encroachment permitting. That is your driveway. That is the access to your site from the public roadway to your site is an encroachment permit. That must be in place before you can open for business, but it does not prevent you from starting earthwork. Those take about 2 months to secure. Next is water and wastewater construction permit. This is only needed in the case where you are not a plug-and-play site. If you are a plug-and-play site, that means the infrastructure is in place and it's only a service connection. Therefore, this permit would not be needed to extend wastewater. Air permitting, this is one of the items that you need to identify early and often if it's needed or not. This will impact if you can start foundation construction. So the concrete support for your building itself cannot start until that air permit is in place. These vary greatly from 25 days to 90 days, depending on your emissions. So we want to understand what your emissions are going to be, and we can identify that early in the process while you're in your site selection time frame to see if this is needed or not. That'll allow us to know if you need an expedited process or just the normal process. Expedited comes at a cost. We would like to avoid that at all possible. Sooner we know that, the better. Wetlands permitting. These are regulated at the federal level, just like the air permit. These can take 30 days to 6 months. The good news is most of the sites you're going to see are what you'll find out are palmetto sites, which means we've already vetted the process of identifying where the wetlands are. Sometimes you can't avoid these impacts. Our first step would be to avoid those, but if you do need to impact it, it's not an extremely difficult process. It just takes time. And we have a great relationship with the Army Corps of Engineers. There's actually a designated person that is for the state of South Carolina, which allows us to get these permits faster than any state in the United States while still following the federal guidelines. Building permit, this is something you need before you can start construction of your building. They vary depending on the city or municipality that you're going to be in. So we would also want to, as soon as we identify where you want to be, we would provide you more information. Here's an example building, Amazon distribution facility, 1.1 million square feet or approximately 102,000 square meters. This building was built in 10 months. That is fast, faster than the norm, but that shows you the feasibility if with the proper planning of how fast we can go in South Carolina. This building was started earthwork or site work within 1 month of a letter of intent being issued by Amazon to come to Lexington, South Carolina. The cost of this construction, you see a few different variations on the unit rates there, $43 a square foot or $538 per square meter or 40,000 Indian rupees per square meter. All right. Next is the public acquisition process. Some of the questions you've asked of what's the cost of the land? Well, let's also identify how can you get it. So the first thing is the letter of intent to your commitment. That is the number one commitment the state needs to state your company is coming to the United States, but even better to South Carolina. We're a little biased, but we feel this is the best state in the United States to come to. So once you make that commitment, that triggers the ability for the state to say, we are willing to offer you the incentives based on your commitment, and we can start full proceedings. At that point, those incentives are then approved by what's called the council within the Department of Commerce, and then you start with the approval of the conveyance of property. If you are a plug-and-play ready site or under the Palmetto Sites program, it means that's either controlled by the public through direct ownership or through an option. An option is basically permission to buy property at a set maximum price. That is very important on one of the examples we're going to talk about with Sunder and Clayton later on. But to convey that property, there's 3 readings, and it's essentially 3 meetings of the local government entity. The first 2 readings, they're not going to know who your company is. But by that 3rd reading, you need to be ready to have your project announcement because that's when your information becomes public and your name would be out there. to expedite the approach to streamline a project. This is the importance of South Carolina being a business-friendly state. Because if you focus on a Palmetto site's location, that means the Department of Commerce has already studied this to the level of, we understand the due diligence has already been completed, which is the phase 1 environmental site assessment. That tells you, are there tanks on your site? Was the previous user doing something that would hurt the groundwater or an adjacent property? A boundary survey tells you what the limits of the property truly are. Topographic surveys depends on the variation of the site, of the size of the site. The design level geotechnical, we can go ahead and be doing those while those property acquisitions are taking place. And then site design, you can see 1 to 2 months. And then site permitting, we talked about on the previous slide, is about 30 to 45 days. And that can be expedited as well if your project wants to move faster. And then we'd start the bidding and award, which is 1 to 2 months. The advantages of the Palmetto sites, we've talked on a little bit. This is where, if you want to move quickly, you need to focus on a Palmetto site in South Carolina. That tells you it's controlled from a cost standpoint and ownership standpoint. It tells you utility infrastructure, we know what's there, and we know how long it's going to take to get there and what the cost is to get the utilities there. Typically, these are going to be plug and play sites. So if you want to move fast, you need to focus on Palmetto site program. Vastu design experience. From our experience with Indian companies, we've learned a lot about Vastu. I'll admit, 5 years ago, I didn't know much about it, but now I do. And it's been an opportunity in design. It actually is an exciting way to challenge an engineer to think a different way. And as DePaul mentioned, the lower part of the state, more towards the coast, which would be the eastern portion, is flatter terrain. That's going to allow you to manipulate the grade to allow water to flow to the northeast. We also know the square in shape is the ideal. We've also worked where sometimes that ratio can go to 1.25 to 1 to get a little bit of variance off of that. The downside with that, sometimes you end up with little parcels of land because the South Carolina, the boundaries of properties, there's really no rhyme or reason. Sometimes it may follow a creek. Sometimes it might be just what was handed down to the descendants. So the lines aren't going to follow that true north direction that's ideal. What we can do is work with you to find ways to either sell off those other properties to other entities to keep that true square property, and then the entrance being on the northern end of the eastern property line. We understand there's some variances that are allowed, but that would be the ideal location. So just to show you the comfort level that we know how to do Vastu. So next we can talk about some experiences. So this was Project Gateway, which is Sunderland Clayton. We made this project looked at 3 times. They selected a site. This site here is the first one. They did not go after a Palmetto site. The downside of that was we were told a price when we first selected the site, and after it was chosen, the price doubled by the property owner. This is why we encourage you to talk to Department of Commerce early and often. Let them help you navigate some of these properties as opposed to going a different direction and avoid this circumstance. So if you go through Department of Commerce, they're going to protect you from that, and working with someone like John Fleming down in Southern Carolina Alliance as well. They have a lot of plug and play properties that are available to look at right away. This site naturally drained to the south and the east, but we were allowed to, since it was a flat terrain, we were able to convey it to design the stormwater to go to the northeast. One of the challenges was the driveway location coming in at the northern end of the eastern property line. That ended up needing to be a public right-of-way. That can cause some additional cost to the projects, but we were able to find a way to make that work with the property only being the square area, but it did come at additional cost to the project. So that's what we want to do, is make sure you understand we can design to Vastu, but we can also tell you some of the cost implications that could be associated with that. And then the next slide is talking about another location. This is in the Southern Carolina Alliance territory. This is the Southern Carolina Industrial Campus. And this site actually naturally sets up very well for Vastu. The roads tended to be very close to the north. This was an experience that we had that was dealing with magnetic north versus true north. So we've been able to adapt to each of the variations within Vastu as well, and happy to work with anything that might come our way from your design projects. And the existing infrastructure is ideal for also meeting Vastu because we can bring everything in that northeast corner as well. And the last slide was just another example of a site that we can work from a drainage standpoint, but the entry point couldn't quite come in on the eastern property line. So ideally, it would come in on the northern property line, but we can meet most of the other opportunities that would be presented from the Vastu. And that was a very quick rundown of some of the site work portions. So we're trying to get you back on schedule as much as possible. But Tarun, we really appreciate the opportunity to speak today.
Excellent, Kyle, and excellent, Deepal. You're one of the very few people I have met in the United States who have the experience of Vastu, forget about just knowing. And this is very important for us in India. And I'm glad to hear your experience and know about your expertise. So now I'm really conscious. I have literally 8 minutes for this Q&A. So, and I have a lot of questions to cover, some very specific, which the audience has asked. So bear with me if it's like a quick fire round of questions. I begin with you, Deepal and Kyle. Could you give us the cost of power and the cost of water, ballpark figures, and is there availability of soft water in the state?
Yes, Tarun, the cost of power is dependent on how much power you're going to use.
Yep.
You can negotiate with an industrial rate from the different power companies. We have Duke Energy, which is the largest power company in the United States, has territory here. Santa Cooper is a state-run utility, and Dominion, which is a private entity. And then we have 20 electric co-ops. So there's a number of entities that sell power. Usually average around 6 cents a kilowatt hour, but for industrial customers, depending on rate, you can negotiate, uninterruptible rate, etc. Water, there's soft water available, there's treated water, but you can also, depending on the site location, if you're close to a river, you can withdraw from the river. You can also drill wells into the ground and withdraw from there as well. So, and of course, the cost of water, it's also dependent on the amount of water that you're using, and it's very affordable.
Got it. So cost of power, you said 6 cents, about 4.5 rupees per kilowatt hour is something realistic. And the soft water is available depending on the site. And because there are a lot of industries, it is affordable. It will depend on the offtake, yeah?
Yes, that is correct.
Right. Then the other question I have is there any power alternative apart from grid power, like solar? Do you see that standalone as well?
Yes, so a number of companies are looking for green power. Many of the utilities have a goal of 25% green power. There's wind, solar, and natural gas. So solar power energy is what's predominant in South Carolina, and you can have it on your site. There may be a solar power grid right close by to your site, so it is available.
Got it. And one of the things which I picked up in your slide, Kyle, was the cost of construction, about $43 per square foot, which is about 3,000 Indian rupees per square foot. Is this kind of, so if you're looking at a 50,000 square foot building, is this something, how long does the whole construction process take once you've acquired the land and all the permitting? Just the build?
A 50,000 square foot building you could build in 5 to 6 months easily. And the cost per square foot would go up a little bit for that small of a building. You'd be looking closer to $50 a square foot for something of that size. So the larger the building, you get some scale of economy, the cheaper per square foot you'll see.
But design, permitting, and land acquisition will take 3 to 4 months, and the construction another 5 to 6 months. So within a year, you can be in your building. And South Carolina, we actually can construct year-round. It is hot and it's cold, but it's not like we have winter where in some states have ice and they cannot construct. We can construct year-round.
Got it.
And prices are for concrete buildings as well. I want to make sure that's understood. Those are cast in place, tilt-up wall construction. There's some locations, if you wanted to have a metal building, you can get even cheaper per square foot, but that would be for concrete walls, which would be some of our Class A parks would require that.
Got it. And one other question was, since we are talking about the textile industry, anything you want to comment upon environmental laws related to discharge and washing of chemicals?
Yes, so the state of South Carolina is also controlled by the federal government about discharges to the environment. Kyle mentioned air and stormwater and wastewater. So depending on the industry, we will provide a pre-treatment questionnaire, and depending on these chemicals, dyes from textiles, or whether it's metals from a metal fabricating facility, there may be some pre-treatment required, and it's specific to each industry, and we're used to working with the different types of industries. And South Carolina being a very heavy industrial state, the state agency that regulates it is very used to working with different types of industries and are very business friendly.
Excellent. Thanks, Dipal. Thanks, Kyle. John, if I may have a question for you, John. You indicated the land cost in the region of $10,000 to $25,000 an acre, John. Could you also tell us about the wage levels? Are there any minimum wages, John? You may have to unmute. Yeah.
Yep. So the minimum wages vary again across the state as they're looking at incentives. But in our region, kind of in the Southern Carolina region, probably an average wage would be around $15 US per hour.
Okay. Okay. And how long do you think you mentioned a couple of sites owned by the county? How long does the whole process of land buying from the county once a client has selected a land?
So similar to what DePaul pointed out on their slides, the county, like I said, as they pointed out, you're guaranteed the price because the county is interested in creating jobs. So it moves forward, it can move fast. Typically it takes 3 meetings from the local council, but they can schedule those meetings very quickly to accommodate any schedule that the company needs. It does not have to be, they meet usually once a month, but they can call special meetings and they can meet all within 45 days, have all 3 meetings within the 45-day period.
Thanks, John. And this brings me to my last question, Teresa, if I can bring you in. Teresa, I think Sam told us about the reduction in the corporate tax to about 21%. Would you want to give us a quick update on the state income tax and also the fee in lieu, the property tax, very high level, in about a minute? You have a minute to answer your question.
Very good. Yeah, as I mentioned, there'll be 3 types of taxes that you would look at coming to South Carolina. That would be the property tax, corporate income tax, and sales tax. Corporate income tax is 6% in South Carolina. It's among the, it's 5% in South Carolina, among the lowest in the Southeast. I will note that with manufacturers, a lot of times they will not have a corporate income tax liability because in South Carolina, the way we would formulate that, it's only going to be based on your sales within the state. So if you were have a facility in South Carolina and are sending the majority of your product around the country, it's going to limit what your corporate income tax is going to be. And we have a number of incentives that would be a credit if you find yourself with that tax liability, that corporate income tax credit can offset that. So if you do have a liability, we can reduce that sometimes all the way to 0. Regarding property taxes, those are established by the local level only. So it's going to be very dependent on where you locate. We do have a fee in lieu of property taxes, which is a way that the local government can help reduce that tax burden on the company. And what they would do is it's essentially reducing that tax bill. So there are 3 things that we look at is the fair market value of the property times an assessment ratio times the millage rate, which is set by the county. With the fee in lieu, we can reduce that assessment ratio from 10.5% down to as low as 6%. And they can also lock in that millage rate for as long as 30 years so that you know what your property tax liability is going to be. So that's part of what you would negotiate on the front end. We'd lock that in and you know that your taxes are going to be the same on that property for up to 30 years.
Excellent. So with that rapid fire Q&A, we have exceeded our time limit only by a minute. So I thank all presenters for bearing with us in terms of this rapid fire. And a big thank you once again to Mr. Shanmugam. And we really look forward to supporting companies from India, from Bangladesh, as they evaluate their entry into the United States and provide a compelling proposition for South Carolina as a location. Clearly, you've heard the competitive land prices, $10,000 to $25,000. You've heard power at 6 cents. You've heard the lowest unionization rate. You've heard logistics, one of the quickest turnaround time in Port of Charleston at 21 minutes. So in summary, a very compelling business case. And as the India office, we'll be happy to take any further questions. In the invite, you have the details to reach out to us, and all these presentations would be sent to all registered participants. Thank you to all participants. Once again, have a lovely evening and have a good day ahead. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.